Hey guys, so the hard truth is that esports are pay to win. So as an engineer, I want to tell you exactly which settings in game and outside the game, so your hardware, you want to have the best possible competitive experience in Rocket League. The first thing I want to talk about is internet. So Rocket League is an online game, so of course you need good internet to be able to compete. The first thing you want is a wired connection and not Wi-Fi because it's more stable, first. Second, it has no interferences because it's over a wire and not over the air. It's also full duplex, which means that when someone is using, for example, your whole upload bandwidth, you still have your whole download bandwidth available to you and vice versa, which is not what happens over Wi-Fi. Then, internet technologies, of course you cannot do much about this if you live in an area where you only have one of these. Just pick the best, of course, but it's good to mention them anyways. So first is FTTH, or fiber to the home, which is of course the best, full fiber connection. Then there's the FTTC, fiber to the cabinet, which is a fiber up until the cabinet and then copper wire to your home. And then ADSL, which is full copper. You don't want to have ADSL if you can avoid it because it's an older technology. FTTC is still 100% fine. It is what I use and I don't have any problems streaming with maximum bandwidth and so on. And if you have access to FTTH, that's even better, of course. Then you also want to have a good modem and router. The two things are usually in the same solution these days. And this is because, for example, I had a ton of internet problems back in the day and I couldn't figure out what was causing them. And eventually I changed modem to a third-party one and everything was fixed. That modem also has QoS, which is important because quality of service is something that allows you to give more bandwidth to a certain device or a certain app when the network is crowded. So if someone's watching Netflix on the other room and they're hindering your connection, you set up quality of service and you should be able to have better connectivity on your device. So then moving on to the actual PC hardware, the first thing is the input peripheral. So the first thing, you want to take care of it. You want to have the possibility to troubleshoot if you feel like there is some problem with your hardware and also optimize it. So how do you do this? You can use gamepadtester.com, for example, and Xinput Tester for the port and polling rate testing. So I'm going to show you real quick. So Gamepad Tester is this one. You can see that I already have some stick drift on my controller. And then you can test the circularity like this. You just slowly circle around and here you see the average error of your controller. When you want to check your port and polling rate with Xinput Tester, this is what you want to do. You download this, you start rolling with the left stick before you run the program, just like this. You run the program, it's gonna get 1,000 samples in this case, and it will tell you the outliers, the average polling rate, maximum polling rate, and so on. So you can see that my controller here has around 250 Hertz of polling rate. Why am I talking about controller? Well, the important thing about controller is that it has proportional input as opposed to KBM. So keyboard and mouse, basically you press a button and you get the full extent of that button. So if you press W, you're throttling 100%. If you don't press W, you're not throttling. On controller instead, you can gently press your triggers and you can see here, this is 100%, this is 50%, so I guess 50% of the maximum output possible here. So this is important because it allows you to be more precise. Of course, you're slightly slower, but precision is a big deal in Rocket League, so that's why I always say play on controller if you can, especially if you have just started the game and you don't have a ton of hours into KBM and you can still make the switch and have a big improvement in the long run. So there are alternatives that are somewhat in between KBM and controller, and they are first the Azeron. You can go on azeron.eu to see their products. They are called keypads because they have one input that is basically a stick of a controller here on the left side. It's just for your left hand or your right hand if you're a lefty, and then you have a lot of customizable keys that act like a keyboard. So it's an in-between. Then you have the Razer Tartarus, which is a left hand keyboard that has proportional input, so you can press harder and get the full extent of the key you're pressing, or you can press softer and get a lesser extent. They are in between controller and keyboard and mouse, so if you don't feel like going full controller yet, those can be good alternatives, but yeah, I would say still controller is the best option. So now that you know that controller is the best option, what is the best controller? So first thing is having a controller with Xbox layout, because it has better ergonomics. So basically your thumb is going to be in a resting position all the time on the left stick, instead of being in a tension position all the time, which is more comfortable in the long run. So if you're a true gamer, you're gonna be playing for long periods of time probably, so you wanna have the most comfortable setup possible. You wanna have back buttons. You wanna have buttons and not paddles, because you can see how quick they are to act. You don't have big floppy paddles on the back. I also have these two in the front, they're also mechanical. So with these, you have access to basically some advanced control schemes. For example, you always have your hands in the same spots, and you're gonna use the other fingers instead. Because for example, with some unoptimized control schemes, you kind of have to press a ton of buttons with a single thumb, and that is of course unoptimized. Then you wanna have mechanical switches. You can hear when I'm clicking, they have a really short travel distance, so they're very quick to be activated, and you can clearly hear and feel when they're activated, which is much harder to do on membrane controllers. Then you want to have a raised left stick, because it allows for a higher degree of precision with your stick movement, which is a big deal, as we talked about earlier with the proportional input. So basically the only controllers right now that have these features are the Razer Wolverine Ultimate, which is this one, which is unfortunately out of production. So you might want to get the Razer Wolverine V2 Chroma instead, which is the newer version. Then the last thing you can do to improve your response is overclocking your controller. So don't worry about it. Your controller is not going to get destroyed by overclocking it, as some people might tell you. You're actually not even overclocking your controller itself. You're only overclocking the polling rate of the USB to which your controller is connected. So that is safe, and it gives you a faster response, mostly on PS controllers, on PlayStation controllers, because Xbox controllers have a locked polling rate on the PCB, even though mine had slight advantages when I overclocked it. But you also get a general increase in consistency for Xbox controllers. Moving on to the next step, which is of course the PC itself. You want to play on PC, not on console. We'll see later why. You want to play on a desktop and not a laptop. First, because of cooling. Of course, if you want to play for hours in summer, it's gonna be hard to play on a laptop without performance degradation due to heating up. And also the replaceability and upgrades of parts is much easier. How powerful must your PC be? Your PC has to be able to have at least 240 FPS, even in the toughest scenarios, which for example you could test in a map like this one, the new one, with 4v4, with bots maybe, with demos and so on. You want to make sure that you always have 240 FPS constant. And this has to happen without your GPU maxing out. Your GPU shouldn't max out, because when it does, your PC basically creates a render queue. The CPU is faster, so it creates some frames, and then your GPU processes them. But since there's a delay between the two, you have an increase in input lag. There are some technologies that improve this, like NVIDIA low latency mode, but you don't want to use that if you can avoid it. And there's also NVIDIA Reflex, which allows you to run your frames uncapped and still get no render queue whatsoever, but that has to be supported by the game, and the Rocket League does not support it yet. Then we move to the monitor. So remember the 240 FPS, you want to have a 240 Hertz monitor to display all these FPS. So this is the refresh rate of your monitor. Now let me show you real quick this. So you can see here 60 Hertz, 60 FPS, you roughly get 30 milliseconds of input lag on average, and that is as optimized as it gets. Then if you increase your FPS, you can see that as you increase your FPS, your latency goes down and down and down. And then if you upgrade your monitor, you will actually be able to display those FPS faster on your screen, and therefore your latency will go down. Will go down and down and down up until you get to basically a plateau. You can see here already 240 FPS, 144 Hertz, that's already pretty good. If you want to make everything perfect, you want to match your FPS with your hertz. So you want to get a 240 FPS, 240 hertz monitor. So you can see here. And if you want to go even further, I would not recommend it, because as you can see here, the difference between 240 setup and 360 setup is barely even noticeable, and it's much more expensive. And not only that, but also 360 hertz monitors, they also lack in some areas, like for example the overdrive. So what is the overdrive? It is a setting that most monitors have, at least the gaming ones, that reduces ghosting. So what is ghosting? You could test it on this site. If you see this image slightly blurred on one side, you might have ghosting. Then you want to turn up your overdrive. You can turn it up to the maximum and see how it goes, but you might experience inverse ghosting, so you will see blur on the other side. So you turn it down a bit and you find out, at least in my case, that the middle setting is the best one. So I have no ghosting, I can see everything perfectly. You want to have a size of your monitor of 24 or 27 inches. Usually these two are the values on the market, and 24 is pretty good for me personally. You don't want to have a too big monitor, because if you stay close to it, then you might have to look around in order to see the information, and that is unoptimized. You want something that is always visible, even with your peripheral view, without having to look around. Then 1440p, that's the resolution. You want to have at least 1080p, I would say, but 1440p is slightly better. If you have a 24 inches monitor, you're not gonna see any difference probably. It's gonna be very, very small. And you want to have 240 hertz refresh rate, as we discussed previously. And then you want to have roughly 1 millisecond of response time gray to gray of your monitor, so that the monitor processes the information with this time, which is very low. And then if you get a monitor that has G-Sync, that's pretty handy, but it's not needed for Rocket League, because we're running for 240 FPS on 240 hertz monitor. So we're gonna have matching FPS and refresh rate all the time, ideally. So you will not see any tearing issues that are the reason why these technologies of synchronizations exist. If you're on a budget, just go for 24 inches and just stay a bit closer to the monitor. You can go with 1080p instead of 1440p. As I said, there's no big difference, especially on 24 inches. And then 165 or 144 instead of 240 hertz. You might have some minor tearing issues, but at this high FPS, it's probably not gonna be visible, and therefore it's fine if you're on a budget. Then moving on to the output peripherals, in this case audio. So you want to play on headphones and not speakers, because they offer a higher level of immersion, isolation, and overall sound quality. You want to have some neutral sounding headphones, not the gaming ones, because gaming ones have a sound profile. So a sound profile basically is an equalization that is built in the hardware of your headphones. This is usually done to improve certain games that are usually first-person shooters, and they usually dampen certain frequencies because you don't need them, and they boost other frequencies because you need them. For example, footsteps when someone is speaking, and you want to be able to hear them as fast as possible. But actually you can do this in a better way. You can have some neutral sounding headphones without any sound profile, and then you can achieve your tuning of the sound. You can create equalizations with a sound card instead for different activities. For example, I'm going to show you here my Sound Blaster command. You can see here I have the SPX profile for Rocket League. Then I can put the one for music, and I changed it up a bit in order to suit my needs. And yeah, this way you can achieve the best performance possible in audio as well. Moving on, we have the in-game settings. So let me show you here. Audio, I can show you real quick. I would say keep these ones off, voice chat if you use it, and then yeah, these ones are personal preference. So here you want to have the maximum resolution possible, so 1080p in my case. You want to play on full screen, not on borderless. I am in borderless right now because I need it for the sake of the video. But yeah, you have to play on full screen because it adds input lag when you play on borderless, because Windows has to adjust the windows instead of staying focused on one single app. You want to have vertical sync off because it adds input lag, and we don't need it because we won't have any screen tearing since we play on 240 FPS, 240 Hz. Anti-aliasing off because it doesn't really change much if you keep it on, and you just get less FPS. Render quality high because otherwise the game looks unplayable. And render detail, okay, this is a preset, so don't touch this. 240 FPS locked because we want to have no render queue whatsoever. Texture detail, all world detail, all low, low, low. World detail, if you have a very beefy PC, you might be able to turn it up to high quality and see a few more things, but some other things are more distracting, like the grass, for example, and some things around the maps, like Neo Tokyo, for example. So it's not always good to have this. You just get a better trail on the ball. It's a bit down to personal preference, but I would rather keep this off and have more stable FPS in general. This is also the reason why you want to keep this all off, except for transparent goalposts, because of course they give you a competitive advantage. Dynamic shadows, I keep them on because you can get some slight bit of information by keeping this on, by looking at the shadows, but it's no big deal, you can turn it off. I personally keep bloom on, even though it's just a visual thing, it's just down to personal preference. Then interface, you want to keep the nameplate scale up to 130 and 140% because you want to see everyone on the field at all times. You don't want to lose track of them, and you want to spot fake kickoffs, for example, but you don't want to keep it too high, otherwise it might clutter your view. Then controls, we have steering and aerial sensitivity. So steering and aerial sensitivity is something that is down to personal preference, but keep in mind that higher sensitivity means a faster actuation of whatever you're doing, so steering or aerialing, but also less precision. It's kind of like KBM. KBM has 100% inputs as fast as possible the whole time, but it's more difficult to control them. So my advice is to go as high as you can without impairing your precision. And this applies mostly to aerial sensitivity because steering sensitivity is already pretty snappy in Rocket League, even if you have low sensitivity. So what you can do to understand if your aerial sensitivity is too high is try to do some tornado spins, which is holding arrow right by also holding left or right on your joystick, and see if you can get some perfect tornadoes. You can see that I get perfect tornadoes like this, very clean looking, whereas if I increase my sensitivity too much, let's say to maximum, I do the same thing and it's much harder to get perfect tornadoes. You can see that my car spins out a little bit more. I don't get clean tornadoes anymore. On this side a bit, on this side not really. So yeah, go as high as you can without hindering your precision. The next topic, we have car design. So car design might seem a stupid topic, but it's actually important because there is placebo, like blue car is faster, which is definitely not the case, but there is also distraction, like when you use some big bright floppy wheels, for example an Octane that already has quite floppy wheels, and you're gonna feel heavy. That is one of the reasons. You have a car that is always on your screen and you see it, and with the corner of your eye you always see it, and it's distracting you because it's just too big, it has floppy wheels and so on, it has a big topper, it has an antenna. Don't use those things. Usually I prefer dark designs like this one because they feel less distracting in general. So yeah, black OEM, black DHE, black Veloce, black painted car like this Fennec, and the dark decal. And which bodies do you want to use? So there are 6 presets of different hitboxes in Rocket League. So if you want to be as consistent as possible, you want to use the Octane hitbox. The fact is that actually the Octane hitbox is better represented by the Fennec instead. As you can see here, I have the hitbox visualization from Bakkesmod, and you can see that it's very, very precise. You have to look at the front. I usually close one eye to see it very well, and you can see that in the front it's really precise. The height is also pretty good, and the width is decent, but it's not perfect. If we go to the Octane instead, the front is not as good as the Fennec. There's a big part of the front of the Octane that does not appear. It's like a light Fennec, but it also lacks some parts, as you can see there. So this is if you want to have the most consistent experience possible, and this is why most people use the Octane preset. If you want to pop off, you want to go for the Breakout hitbox. So the best cars for these are the Breakout itself and the Whiplash, in my opinion. There's also the Breakout Type S, which is very, very similar to the Breakout. And this is if your floor is already pretty good and you're looking to improve on your peak. Instead, if you want to go for something in the middle, you want to go for the Hybrid preset. which is well represented by the Insidio. The Insidio is the only car that I can really suggest from this category. It's very representative of the hitbox. You can test it yourself with this plugin right here. It's called the hitbox plugin on Bakkesmod. You just install it from bakkesplugins.com and you enable it on practice, and yeah, you will be able to see all the hitboxes of the various cars. But I've done this research for you, and I will tell you that these are the best. Also, on the Octane preset, the honorable mentions are, of course, the Octane and also Takumi and Marauder. Then, if you want to go for something a bit more crazy and you want to go for the tallest hitbox possible, you want to go for the Merc hitbox, which is perfectly represented by the Merc. And if you want to go instead for the widest preset possible, on the complete opposite side, you want to go with the Plank hitbox, which is well represented by the Paladin. So yeah, Insidio is something in the middle between these two. Breakout is the longest. Octane is one of the tallest, but not the tallest. And then if you want to go for something that is in between, but it doesn't shine in any particular case, you want to go for the Dominus hitbox. But I wouldn't really suggest it, because every single Dominus hitbox car, except for the Masamune, has problems in the front. They show you a part of the hitbox that is actually not there. They're way longer than they actually are. So yeah, if you really cannot avoid using a Dominus preset, go for the Masamune. Try it out, and it's a pretty good car all in all. But yeah, you want to go on this order pretty much. So moving on, we were talking about Bakkesmod. Bakkesmod is not just for training. You've seen that you can also use plugins to do other things, like I've showed you. It is also used to have preemptive information on other players in the lobby. Imagine that you're solo queuing, you enable the MMR display on Bakkesmod, and you can see if, for example, your teammate is queuing with a diamond. Then we're going into the less important stuff here, the storage. M2 is the most recent and best technology when it comes to storage. So they're also quite affordable these days, so if you have a motherboard that supports them, definitely get one of those. Then SSDs are still solid state drives like M2. They just have slower loading times, but they are still a very good technology, so they're okay. And the hard drive disks, or HDD, you want to avoid those because you have rotating parts. They are very slow. In general, they can fail with their mechanical parts. So this is the order. You need this because they have faster loading times, of course, and you also have less risks of loading slowdowns affecting the performance at game start. For example, when you're trading with someone, if you have Rocket League on your HDD, which is really slow, you start loading your inventory, and it takes a buttload of time to display all your items, and that is suboptimal, of course. Then you have a chair and footrest. Of course, you're gonna stand in this position for a long time if you're a true gamer, so you want to have the most comfortable setup possible. So what do you need? A footrest is something a lot of people don't look into, but it's actually very comfortable. And then your chair, you want to be able to adjust the height, the rotation, the reclination. You want to have a lumbar support for the long sessions, 3D armrests, which means that you can increase the height, the tilt in various directions. And you want to have a lateral support, which is basically this, which helps you stay in place. And what I call the swing spring, which is this. It's basically a spring that puts you back in place when you swing in your chair. It's not super important, but it's something that tells you the overall quality of your chair. So then, to wrap it up, here's my setup's input lag. So basically, the three big components are input, processing, and output. My input is my controller. You've seen previously that it has a 250 Hertz polling rate. So my PC scans 250 times per second what my controller is doing. So 1 second is 1000 milliseconds. 250 Hertz means 250 times per second. So 1000 divided by 250 is 4 milliseconds of input lag just for my controller. Then my PC, 240 Hertz, you can see also in Rocket League, you can use in settings, interface, performance graph short, you can see here frame. This is the milliseconds of input lag that your PC is having with the 240 FPS. Then the monitor, I also have 240 Hertz monitor, so I'm gonna have another 4.2 milliseconds of refresh rate. It will take this time to display the information on my monitor after it's been processed by the monitor itself in 1 millisecond of response time. So this makes a total of 13.4 theoretical milliseconds of input lag. I say theoretical because there are also other things in the mix, like the game engine. They should also be counted, but it's pretty hard to quantify them unless you make a full test. But this gives you already a pretty good idea, because in my case I have less than 20 milliseconds of input delay end to end, and this basically is an esports ready setup. So if you have a setup like this and you suck, it's your fault. There's no excuse. Then if we go up by around 30 milliseconds, so in the 50s range, you have a mid-range setup. If you go even higher, so another 30 milliseconds, you get to around 80 or more, you have a low-level setup that is comparable to a console, where you're playing on 60 Hz, 60 FPS, and you're usually playing on a screen that is a TV instead, that has very high response time, and so on. So that is an unoptimized setup, and you want to aim to go around the 20 mark. So with this, I finished my video, and if you have questions, make sure to leave them down below in the comments, and I will try my best to clarify everything. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.